Okay, cool. Let's kick it off. So breath work, basically to understand the foundation of what I teach is really anchored around the 90-second rule. And the 90-second rule teaches that our body has a 90-second physiological response when we experience an emotion. And most of us disassociate, we numb, and we distract. And that's all happening on a subconscious level. So when I tell people about the 90-second rule, a lot of times people are like, well, wait a second, like, how come I'm still feeling that thing after 90 seconds is over? And that's because you have a thought and that sends a signal to the body. You have a feeling, but you're disassociated from the body. So you don't actually feel it. So you're getting stuck in the thought, right? So what I'm going to teach us right now is just a 90-second breathwork technique, not going too deep or anything, but just to feel what's coming up so that we can move through it. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's do
Awesome.
it.
Cool. So we can close down our eyes. And for the listeners, obviously for those of you out there in listening land, if you're driving a car or doing anything like that, don't close your eyes, but you can always breathe with us. But for us and for those of you listening that can close your eyes, you can begin to do so now. And just finding a seat, sitting straight up, feeling your feet on the floor. And through your nose, inhaling all the way up, sipping in a bit more air at the top. And a big sigh, dropping the shoulders, letting the belly come back to the spine, sighing it out. Another big expansive inhale, letting the belly expand and letting the back body expand as you bring that breath all the way up. Sipping in a bit more air at the top, holding the breath here. And just gently rolling up the eyes and just scanning to see if there are any negative thoughts or negative feelings and allowing those to come to the surface now. That's it. And sighing out any expectations. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. That's it. That's it. And another big inhale up. And when you get to the top, sipping in a bit more air, holding your breath, rolling up the eyes, releasing tension in your jaw, and just accepting, just surrendering to this negative thought or emotion that may be coming through now. Because before we transform it, we must accept it. This is how we utilize breath work for shadow work as opposed to utilizing breath work as a band-aid. And sigh it out. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. And one last one, inhaling all the way up. And once you get to the top, sipping in a bit more air, holding your breath, and just asking yourself, what do I need know to be true about myself? What is one positive thing that I know is true about myself? And forming that into an I am statement. One positive I am statement. And as you say that, just allow that phrase to land in every one of the cells in your body. And without any expectations, just allowing yourself to be here now, sending yourself unconditional love, exhale it all out and let it go. And with that, just flickering the eyes back open. So quick little reset, nothing fancy, pretty simple.
Thank you for that.
You got it.
Ooh.
How'd that feel for you?
Two things came up. When you were saying negative, the first word that came up was criticism. And more particularly around criticizing, receiving criticism, and then kind of passing it on to others. Every day I've talked to at least one stranger, and it's the idea of just trying to see how quickly can I get into a deeper conversation with someone. So finding the least amount of questions I can ask someone to understand who they are. And, within those questions, when I ask them, I notice that there's inherent criticism that I have towards their answers, which is very interesting because the other thought that came up was the last part of what is positive about me is that I'm curious. But I think curiosity is more about just opening up without actually having criticism baked into it. You're sort of there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think when we have, I'll just call it a trigger, right? If we're being critical about someone else because their answer wasn't the way we want it, it's activating something within us, and that's all a trigger is. And that's just shining a light for self-awareness. I mean, the biggest thing we can do is to be curious, not critical. So one of the foundations of what I teach is when you build that awareness of, a lot of times I'll call it shame and guilt, but we can use critical thinking or feelings in this scenario. when you build the awareness around having that feeling, well, celebrate that, because since you built that awareness, now you can respond as opposed to react. And I think that is so huge, because oftentimes we just wallow in like, what's wrong with me that I'm criticizing that other person? Or why do I feel shameful and guilty? And we just get stuck in that like victim consciousness. But if we can use that to be like, oh my God, like so much of what I'm doing is about building presence and moment to moment awareness. I just did that. That's awesome. Now that I have that awareness, I can choose how to show up, meaning I can respond versus subconsciously react and get stuck in my stuff, you know?
I want to understand more of your own story of how you reached here. So, what do we need to understand about your story to understand why you do what you do?
That's a great question. I love that. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, I was, the vernacular here isn't important. It's semantics to say if I was chasing success or if I was pursuing success. Some people get stuck on, well, you shouldn't have an energy of chasing, you should be pursuing. It's like, basic for me was at 31 years old in 2019, I had finally hit 7 figures in my business. I was working less than 4 hours a day. So I didn't have, I know you're out there in Austin. I didn't have like the Tim Ferriss stream of a 4 hour work week, but I had a 4 hour work day, which is still fantastic. And at the same time, I was named to Silicon Valley's 40 under 40 list and my industry's rising stars. Yet beneath all of that, I was going through a numbing depression. And where I was at then was like, I achieved my dream, right? I had peaked at my version of Mount Everest, yet I'm facing this numbing depression now. And what I realized through doing the work, and that's been with breathwork, ayahuasca, bufo. So, like, I've done all of those in addition to other healing modalities that are just holistic, if you will, outside of medicine work. What I've come to know now is that I was operating on the subconscious belief of when I achieve ABC, I will feel XYZ. And I think there are a lot of different archetypes of people that get into the healing work. And for me, I fall into the archetype of like that person that was pursuing or chasing success only to get to that final destination to be like, I thought I'd feel different, you know?
I was listening to your conversations on other podcasts, and I think a big part of your mission is to help raise the consciousness of this world as it's slowly falling. So, what is your pulse right now on the world's consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the current state of the Schumann resonance. Every now and then I'll hear about it or look down that rabbit hole, and that's like a good way to scientifically be like, oh, that's what where the state of consciousness is, right? But from like a more feeling intuitive place, like it's no wonder to me that my awakening journey started in 2019, and I've met so many people that were activated in 2019. In hindsight, it's like, oh wow, we needed all those people to wake up prior to the lockdowns and everything. And I was in an incredible place in 2020 with respect to all the devastation that the pandemic caused. For me, as I reflect backwards, 2021 were the best years of my life. I learned so much. I grew so much. I was just at the beginning stages of awakening. And when everything was burning down, I wasn't in fear. That was an opportunity to lean in more. And in a lot of ways, when things went quote unquote back to normal or new normal in 2022, my energy, it was like, no, like we're already here, like let's not pretend like we're not here. So now with the political landscape in 2025, and just so many people like entrenched in fear because of it, I think it's now a whole new wave of awakening where those people that, let me back up for a second because I meant to say this. During the lockdowns in 2020 and 2021, a lot of people that weren't necessarily like on a healing path or anything like that, an awakening path, they started to go inward, right? But most people didn't. Most people were just stuck in fear. But I think those people that were starting to go inward back then are going to whole new layers right now. So I would say like it very much feels like we're on the precipice of, I'm not saying like something terrible is coming and looming, but I think it does feel like there is a huge wave of awakening happening right now.
We're talking about fear here. What was your fear at that time in 2019?
2019, my fears were very existential. Going back to my experience, what led me to a breathwork journey where I literally felt reborn, subsequently doing ayahuasca, like it was impending doom with a numbing depression. After ayahuasca, it was why does any of this even matter? Almost like escapism and a disassociation from the human experience, and very existential. In 2020 and 2021, I don't want to say I didn't have any fears, but the normal fears that most people had towards the pandemic, I didn't have those fears. I was fearful of how things would play out in terms of like all of the destruction and devastation, the chaos and the separation, divisiveness, but I had so much faith that it was all happening for greater good, for growth, like the Phoenix, so I didn't have a ton of fear.
Early on, even before 2019, I think you've mentioned that you didn't have this natural mindset of glass being half full. It was more so around, I had to really work towards having this mindset that it's going to be good. And what you're saying right now, things are going to go for the great, there's going to be stuff happening for the greater good. So talk to me through that transition. Like, why do you feel like you had that mindset before, and how did you go about changing that?
Yeah, I think my whole life, great question. And I don't know where you found that, but that's awesome. Yeah, that's good that you found that. I'm like, huh, I don't know. I know I've talked about that, but I don't know where. Anyways, though, yeah, my whole life growing up, very negative, very, very negative, very depressive type symptoms, things like that. In fact, I remember working at a barbecue joint in my senior year of high school, and my mom called me and said, "Congratulations, you got into the college, blah, 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 whatever." And I was like, "Cool." She's like, "Aren't you excited?" I'm like, "No, not really." Cause like I didn't. I was hoping I wouldn't get in, and what I really wanted to do was go to the army, And my parents had set aside like money for college and things like that. Grandparents in my family, it's like not a question. Like all of us go to college, right? And they were like, "We've set you up to go to college, like the army isn't your path, and besides you wouldn't survive there." And that triggered the heck out of me back then, and that was the whole reason why I wanted to go to the army, because I believed I was such a mess up, that was the only place that could straighten me out. That was my outlook. I thought I was so broken that I needed that extreme discipline. Now in college, I ended up going to college, and I did the opposite. I went to what used to be the number one party school in the nation, Chico State. Back in the 90s, it was a number one party school. I became a rep for a bunch of different brands. I was in the top fraternity on campus, lived above the most popular bar in campus, and my major was recreation. So college was a vacation. It was very different. All that to say, I got so much discipline, surprisingly enough, through all of that partying and everything else through the fraternity. The fraternity set so much of a groundwork, and I was just at this place of like, I need something, right? So it gave me like that structure for discipline. And I really think I looked at college as well, being like, this is an opportunity for me to reinvent myself. And that's exactly what I did.
So the reason I'm asking you this question is because a lot of the people that listen to this are generally in their early 20s or mid 20s, and some of them are kind of coming out of college. What would you say to your self that's coming out of college right now in terms of where the world's at, how to go about managing and regulating your emotions?
in terms of managing, regulating your emotions. I would go back to the 90-second rule. So Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor delivered the TED Talk that blew up the TED brand in 2008. And she's a neuroanatomist. She literally brought brain and spinal cord on stage. And as a neuroanatomist, meaning she studies the anatomy of the brain, she told us about the 90-second rule, which teaches our body has a 90-second physiological response when we experience our emotions. Realizing that alone is enough. Like, let that land. If you can fully understand that, if you allow yourself to experience an emotion, which emotions are energy in motion, they will move through you and be in motion. But if you disassociate, you distract, and you numb, then those energies get stuck and stored in the body. So whatever it's going to look like for you, maybe it's a 90-second reset pause to connect with your breath. The framework I teach is breathe, feel, think intentionally. What do you do in those 90 seconds? You breathe to slow down, regulate your nervous system. You feel so that you can allow those to move through you, and then you move forward thinking intentionally. Now, that is the advice I give to anyone and everyone, and literally our children. Like, I have a 1.5-year-old, I'm already starting to work with him on it, right? When I can, at least. But the point being, like, for early teens and whatnot, I think what's so important is being mindful of what it is, how you want to live in your life. Not focusing on a summit, not focusing on an end destination. This is a good time now to teach the yogic philosophy of sadhana. And the yogic philosophy of sadhana teaches us to be in pursuit of. It's the classic saying of it's about the journey, not the destination. How do we do that? Through our daily discipline, our daily practice. And I look at everything from a soul life mindset, soul being inner world, life being outer world. Outer world is our five senses with obligations, responsibilities. Inner world is our thoughts and feelings, and our connection is something greater than this human experience, whether it's religion, spirituality, or anything else. So with that being said, like, when we're looking at our sadhana, our daily habits and behaviors, our daily discipline, we want to check the boxes for both the outer world of our responsibilities and obligations, as well as our inner world of our mental, emotional state and connection is something greater. And I'll close it with this. When I did my yoga training, Dakota Shea, one of my instructors, he said this: to name your ultimate potential is to limit your ultimate potential. Now, when Dakota Shea said to name your ultimate potential is to limit your ultimate potential, immediately I had all these downloads coming through my body being like, oh my God, it makes so much sense, because I had named my ultimate potential as being named Silicon Valley's 40 under 40 list, like literally a list of the 40 most influential people in Silicon Valley under 40. And I was only 31 years old at the time. And I had named my ultimate potential of building a 7-figure business while working just a few hours a day. And all of these things, I had named my ultimate potential. So now instead, I literally have a worksheet I'm happy to share with your listeners, but you guys can make it too. It just at the top, it says ultimate potential. Then it has different categories like spiritual, emotional, physical, like all these different categories, and being like, okay, what are the daily habits and behaviors that I want to embody as I move through my life? So your demographic, your listeners, everyone listening that's in your early 20s, I think that is such a game changer.
Man, we all, I mean, a lot of the conversations I have with people, my friends, I'm 25 right now. A lot of my friends is around success and what that means. And it's very narrow in its definition, as you might know. It is the definition that you're kind of giving in different forms. So it's like, I want to make this much and by this time, I want to be this thing. I want to be Forbes 30 under 30 right now, all this stuff. It's just a different version. So why we hear this, like I hear you right now, and I know that you went through that journey, and then you're like, hey, that's not actually the destination for me. It's a complete different way of looking. I need to look more at my behaviors than this end state. Even when you say that, a lot of people are still gonna keep on going about doing things the same way. So what do you need to say to those people? Like, you've been in that situation. What would you say to them?
Look at Kate Spade, look at Anthony Bourdain, look at Robin Williams, look at all these successful people that took their life. Look at people like Simone Biles, look at people like Michael Phelps, like Jennifer Lawrence, Logic, the rapper, all these other people that were honest with their mental emotional health and became advocates. I have a family member who just almost 2 months ago now just took his own life, and he literally had a mansion in Atherton, like one of the richest areas, like, where all the tech companies
California.
are. Yeah. And he was neighbors with one of the founders of a tech company that every single one of your listeners uses every single day, just to paint the picture of how much finances and the success and material success he had. He was 64 years old, the most charismatic person I've ever met, lights up an entire room, amazingly good looking man, even at 64, had so much love in his heart. And he was so impactful in so many lives that 2,000 people came to his funeral. And this guy had everything on the outside. He had all the material possessions. He had all the money in the world. He had all the admiration. Everyone loved him because he had such a huge heart. Yet he took his own life because he didn't know how to deal with his pain that he was experiencing. And the reason why I bring suicide up is because it's facts. We can look at all of these people that have been so successful and yet still are like, I don't know what to do with it. And maybe that's not going to be your path, or whoever you are listening, where you're going to take your own life. But the point is, money can't buy happiness. There's another friend in business I have. He retired about 8 years ago. He sold his company for millions and lives in Silicon Valley. And I got a call from him about a month ago, and he goes, "Hey, Sammy, what's going on? I'm starting the business again." I'm like, "Oh, I thought you're retired." And he goes, "I'm not afraid to say it. Retirement's not for me. I failed retirement." And this man, like, God bless his heart. He's an amazing guy, amazing businessman. Is he here for mental, emotional stuff? Not at all. He's just a quote unquote a normal person, a normal business person. And the point is, like, my dad just retired last year, both of my parents, and my dad's got so many hobbies. He trains his dogs. He took up woodworking. He has an orchard, and he's constantly busy with these projects that are like fulfilling and soulful to him. But here's this other guy that retired and is financially free, but in the journey that took to become financially free, he probably didn't have many hobbies, and now it's so uncomfortable to be in the stillness, rather, instead of like leaning into that and being like, what do I actually want to experience in my life? He's like, let me just go back to work because I know how to do that thing. Not because he needs more money, not because he has a mission and that he wants to help people. It's because he knows what he's good at and he wants to do that. Sure, that's great. That's not what I want for my life, and that's a self-reflection question for everyone listening.
Have you heard of this guy called Jonathan Haidt?
I don't believe so.
He's a professor at NYU, and he wrote a book a few years ago called The Anxious Generation.
Mm.
I know you're very much into science as much as you're into spirituality with all the stuff you're reading. And, it's a very scientifically backed book on all the research coming out and how the ages between 10 to 24, essentially, how there's just the primary emotion, you're talking about emotions and feeling them. The primary emotion is anxiety between these ages. And a lot of it has to do with the relationship that we've developed with technology at this point, but also to do with the sheer amount of things in front of us and not knowing what to choose. And you're talking about choose the things wisely in some ways. So how would you go about understanding what to choose? I think this is something that's generally why I even named the podcast True Calling, because I think people are finding it very hard to figure out what life to even design.
Yeah, I'm going to send you a copy of my book, Soul Life Balance. After this, send me your address and I'll send it to you, because I published that book in February of 2022. And a big part of that was rediscovering your passions and your interests, because that's where I was at. I was like, I was like this archetype of this other guy. Like, after I did the spiritual awakening, being like, I don't want to play this game of work anymore. I'm like, what do I enjoy? I don't know. And, I took up painting, I took up playing guitar, surfing, trying all these things to just be like, what do I like? And painting served me for a while. It was very therapeutic. And then one day it was almost like Forrest Gump, like that scene when Forrest Gump is like, you saw that movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I'm a little bit older. I'm 37, but yeah, he's like, I think I'm done running. I'm gonna go home now. Like, yeah, I used to paint a lot, and one day it was just like, I think I'm done, and I haven't painted in well over a year at this point. But it was a big part of my life for about a year. Electric guitar. When I did my I don't need to go into all this, but I played electric guitar in high school, and I bought an electric guitar a few years ago. And I mean, now it's just collecting dust on my wall. I rarely ever pick that thing up, but it was really helpful for me to play it for a few months and get into it and be like, oh wow, there is a lot to this. Surfing, that's a great example of something that is a habit that is stuck, that I'm continuing with, right? Cooking, oh my God, I've always loved to cook, but now I realize like how therapeutic cooking is. For me, cooking is just like doing art because it's an expression and it's trying out these different things. I don't follow recipes, I'm like, oh, would this be good? And it's like once I'm done, I'm like, man, and I love to feed other people too. So like, it's really taking a lot of time to try out these different things. You can't just like say, hey, I want guitar's my thing and guitar's going to be my thing. And then you start doing it and be like, yeah, this doesn't really resonate. This isn't my thing. And that was the case for me with guitar, for example.
I think what you're saying is having the courage to try things. And I think there's more of a lack of courage in the world we're in right now, where there's much more fear on what how we would look, how people might look at us, how, and I think it's much more for the audience that we're speaking to right now, because there's just not been too many experiences to realize, hey, no one's really looking, etc., etc. So from that standpoint, how would you say one can navigate the external criticism by looking at themselves internally?
Yeah, I mean, we just have to own our truth. First we have to know what our truth is, and then we have to have the courage to walk into that. It's going to look different for other people. For me, I'll give you a story, right? Like my personal brand back then was Swag Sam. Anyways, like I was in the promotional products business, so swag, right? And my company's name was Swagwork. So Swag Sam was like my personal brand. And when I did ayahuasca and started to go down the spiritual path, and I started switching my content from like branding and marketing and business and all that to like mindfulness and human origin story and aliens and psychedelics and all this other stuff, like I put in this is back in 2019 or 20, I put in my Instagram bio something like recovering bro. And I would jokingly call myself a recovering bro because I was like, hey, no, no, no. I am cool. I was cool, like
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
am like you. I'm not just this woo person, right? And I needed to use that as like a bridge in terms of feeling safe and comfortable to talk about the topics that were so vulnerable, and that's something that worked for me.
Can we talk a little bit about ayahuasca for a second? I had my first ayahuasca experience this year, about 3 months, 4 months ago. Transformational, insightful, a lot of things that could be its own. Actually, that is my own podcast. That's one of the podcasts out there. I did it with my best friend. I want to know your experience, especially the first one. I think which was very eye opening for you. What are some of the insights that you can kind of share that you think would resonate with someone that is feeling stuck in life?
Yeah, the first thing with medicine work, whether it's ayahuasca, it's bufo, it's iboga, ibogaine, or mushroom ceremony, or anything like that at all, is like you have to be willing and ready to surrender. If you're not ready to surrender, then there's not even a question. And if you have to ask the question of like, what does that mean or what does that entail? Like, I understand that, but understand that like you have to be prepared for whatever comes up because I'm actually an integration coach as well, meaning I help people to prepare and integrate medicine ceremonies. And I have been for several years now. And I've been a part of over 1,000 toad ceremonies. So I know the toad so well. But I have seen so many people fall into victim consciousness, no matter what the medicine was on the other side, because they weren't actually ready for it. So there's a big part of like, when the medicine finds you, it'll be undeniable. And that's what it was for me. And that's probably what it was like for you and many others. You know, it naturally comes to you, and you might not have the language of understanding what it means to be called, but you'll have the experience of it. And when you have the experience, you go, oh, I get what it means to be called, right?
Yes, yes. And I mean, dude, I knew about ayahuasca at least 7 years before I actually did it. Those 7 years, I was just too scared to even try this stuff. I don't know what's going to happen. And then this year, it was like, it feels right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I probably heard about ayahuasca the first time as well to you around 2018 or so. And it was similar for me where it was like, that scares the shit out of me. And I feel like I'll do that one day. And it's good to know. It's good to know that it's there if things ever hit the fan. So my experience was absolutely incredible. It was very beautiful. It was all things. The first night was amazing. Then I just sat a second night, and then I had a few more ceremonies over the years. I haven't sat with ayahuasca for about 4 years now, and I don't feel called to. But the first night was everything. I've had a lot of shame and guilt and self hatred, and a lot of people think of the purge like it's crazy to me. It doesn't make sense. But so many people are like, I would never do that because I don't want to puke. I don't want to shit my pants. You know, like I've heard that so many times. But most of the purges that I've experienced in my 7 or 8 ceremonies, whatever it's been, I don't remember at this moment, most of them have been very beautiful. I remember one that was my first night where I felt this sensation moving through my body, and it kind of reminded me of like when you eat an edible like cannabis and you're like, I think I'm high. Am I high? Oh, the fact that I'm asking if I'm high means I'm high, right? That was me in ayahuasca. I was like, oh, I feel something. Does this mean it's the medicine? Is this it? Oh, wait, this is like weed. Like if I'm thinking about it, this must be it. And then all of a sudden just being like, oh, I think I need a purge, and like getting up, and there was this one specific purge the first night of the medicine where I felt like I purged out my whole entire identity. People talk about seeing their life flash before their eyes. That's what it was like. It was like seeing all of these little snapshots of my life from my past, and all of the shame and self-hatred and all of it, just like letting it go. And then when I was done with that purge, just this big natural sigh and a huge smile, and then just lying down my mat, and then just like letting the journey take me. And that was one of the most beautiful memories that I'll always carry with.
Is there a memory from your history before this ceremony that really stood out as a cornerstone of why you felt so much shame?
No. I have a lot of repressed memories, I would say, and I've done a lot of work to access them. And I've kind of come to a point to accept being like, if I'm not ready, I'm not ready. If there's a reason why they're not coming through. I think for me it's so much more than this lifetime. Like even as a kid, I would say like, you're not my real dad, I'm from the planet Zotar, and I felt like a strong connection to aliens. So naturally, like when all these synchronicities started to occur, and I sat with ayahuasca and I started to learn more about aliens and this and that, some of those memories came back. But I really got into the alien work, like Dolores Cannon's work, and the 3 waves of volunteers that came to Earth essentially, and started research more about it. And I was like, this explains so much sense, because this isn't my natural home. In a lot of ways, I don't think it's any of our natural homes. But for me, there's just been this underlying theme of existentialism. I'm Jewish, and I remember coming home from Sunday school one day as a kid, might have been 8 or 10 years old. My dad was working on his lawnmower, and I asked my dad, if God created us, then who created God? And he couldn't answer that question. And that has, I don't want to say haunted me, but like stayed with me my whole entire life. So I think there's more of like this place, this human experience doesn't feel like home. And I think it's deeper than just stuff in this current incarnation, you know?
I mean, this is fascinating. I really want to go more into this, but I also want to ask you a little bit about the intersection of science and spirituality. Where do you see these two meet? What is happening there? For someone, we're very much hell bent right now in this world to think from a scientific lens. Everything needs to be explained before we can say that this is the conclusion. But some of these things happen sort of not from rational beliefs that we have. They sort of just happen in our life. Serendipity is a great example of that. I feel like you can't really logically make your argument through something that is super serendipitous that happened to you. But what do you feel like is the overlap between science and spirituality?
Yeah, so the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung would talk about like synchronicities, and a lot of us talk about like serendipitous moments. Synchronicity is being in sync, and it feels like a mini miracle. Or it's like, wow, I'm not surprised you asked me this question because this is now the third time that I'm talking about this today, and it's not something I typically talk about, right? So that would be seen as a synchronicity. And specifically, what I was talking about the two previous times I had this conversation today was the differences between a sign and a manifestation that you're creating. Because from a scientific point of view, or even quantum physics, our subconscious, or that is to say, our unconscious mind, is constantly creating our reality. Our thoughts and beliefs attract more. The reticular activating system in the brain is a matchmaking system. So the classic example is like, if you just bought a red car, a red Toyota Camry, you start seeing more of them and you never saw them before, right? So you're creating that reality and your brain is scanning for it because it's a matchmaking machine. Now, from a spiritual lens, we would look at that and be like, oh, wow, that is a synchronicity. Or maybe we're wondering if we should do a plant or earth medicine ceremony and being like, huh, like I would like three specific signs to show me if I should be doing ayahuasca. Now, dolphins are my spirit animal, so I would like to see three dolphins in the next 3 days. And if I see those dolphins in mysterious and miraculous ways, then I know I am to do ayahuasca. And this is like a typical thing, and maybe not dolphins, but like that type of way of going about it, right? Now, from a scientific lens, we're constantly creating our reality. So if I want to see those dolphins in three dolphins in 3 days in mysterious and miraculous ways, not like I live by the beach and I see a sign for a dolphin in the gutter because there's like be safe of our what you put in the gutters because we're living next to dolphins that I see every day, like that wouldn't
Yeah.
count, right? But I see it in a unique and different kind of way, then I'd count that. Now the question is that actually a sign, a synchronicity, or is that a conscious and intent or subconscious manifestation that you are creating? I don't know the answer to that. It's a fun thought experiment, but I will say this. If we are asking for those signs and those signs don't appear, meaning that either one, from a spiritual lens, it wasn't meant for us, or two, from a grounded scientific point of view, our subconscious or our unconscious makes up 95% of our awareness, everything that we don't have access to. If our unconscious isn't going to bring that into our conscious awareness, then also maybe we weren't ready for that. Now, on the flip side, if that was brought into our reality, it was brought into our reality for a reason. So, does it matter if it was from science or spirituality? Maybe not.
I like that a lot. What are ways that you have surfaced up your own subconscious programming? Are there some questions? Are there some examples that you can give?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a master practitioner in something called MER, that's mental emotional release. And it was developed by Tad James back in the 1980s. He trained with Tony Robbins. Everything that Tony Robbins does is NLP. And a lot of the deeper NLP work is known as timeline therapy. And Tad James was the creator of that. His son is Dr. Matt James. Dr. Matt James is the person that trained me. And basically Dr. Matt took timeline therapy and developed it into something so much greater and beyond it, into mental emotional release. But the basic premise of mental emotional release, or MER, is to dive into a person's baggage or their unprocessed emotions and traumas and just their lived experience, not so that someone needs to relive it, because specifically the way we go about it, you don't have to relive it because we're speaking straight to the unconscious. But the idea is, we find out where your timeline is. Is it to the right? Is it to the left? Is it before you? Is it behind you? Where's your timeline, right? Figure that out. And then as I'm doing this one-on-one work with someone, I'll guide them up above their where their physical body is now. And then we drift into the past, into the first time they experience this traumatic event or this unwanted emotion, whatever the thing is. Then leveraging what's called Gestalt therapy, we cancel out the first time the root cause that thing happened, and like a game of dominoes, let all of those events from then to now into the present collapse. And then we drift the unconscious back up and come back into the conscious body. It's an amazing tool that has so much scientific studies to show the efficacy of it. And the beautiful thing is, like, some people are really tapped in, they'll see stuff and they'll know what it is. Other people like myself, like, it's just working with your unconscious, and you may not see something, you may not know what the event is, but if you have the trust, then it actually does collapse the event. So that's how I work with people on a subconscious level to get to the root.
I had a neuroscientist on a few podcasts ago, and she does a lot of work in trauma, specifically PTSD, and kind of doing experiments across the globe. She has one in Pakistan. She has a few basically very high conflict zones, and seeing what happens to people there. And she said something very interesting. I never thought of it like that, but what you're saying makes so much sense with her stuff. She said that if you look at a person that is in the middle of a conflict zone, if you go right now to Palestine and you talk to a kid there, they are so used to their experience around them that they won't show any actual symptoms of PTSD when they're there. And when you actually take them out from there and you move them to the US, for example, and now they are in a situation which has any resemblance to the one before, like a door closing, and then in at Walmart, it suddenly just triggers that part of their brain where they then start experiencing the symptoms, which is where the post aspect of it comes in. So much of our wiring is based on a few events that we are just replicating across time in different environments,
Mm-hmm.
which is what you're saying. It's like you're going back to the actual environment, the first environment where you created that emotion. And then because you're solving for that, you're sort of letting go of all the other ones that are happening after that due to similar environments or similar emotions that you felt because of that previous environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. You nailed it.
Okay, awesome. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your on the emotional side of this. So, can you touch a little bit more on you want to bring out more of the emotional health aspect of mental health?
Mm-hmm.
What does that entail, and how can one go about understanding their emotional health?
Yeah, a lot of times when we talk about mental health, we're referring to mindset, essentially. That's what's inferred. You know, thoughts are the language of our mind, and feelings are the language of our body. And when we experience a thought, it sends a signal to our nervous system, kind of like what we were talking about with the 90-second rule, and how you experience that emotion, and it might come through as like a thought. Then all of a sudden you have a feeling, and most of us don't want to feel that feeling, so we avoid it. So that's the trap of mental health. It's just getting stuck in the mind and not actually getting in the body, because the emotions, remember that emotions are energy in motion, and if we don't allow ourselves to feel those energies, they get stuck and stored in the body. So if we have chronic stress, if we have chronic back pain, if we have all these different diseases, a lot of times what that's stemming from is an unprocessed emotion. So, I've never said this before, but I'll go ahead and say it now because it's what's coming through. But it's cute to talk about mental health, right? It's cute that we're prioritizing mental health, but I don't feel like there's a lot of transformation that happens on the mental health level if we're not stacking that with emotional health. Now, mental health, that's like the mindset work, that's all of that. It's our thought forms, meditation, a lot of times. Just for everyone listening, I'm a yoga instructor, so, and a certified breathwork practitioner as well. So I'm very much into tools like meditation, but understand like how most people think and use meditation is to silence their mind. It's to avoid, distract, and numb those thoughts as opposed to accept them. So is that actually doing us a service, or is it a disservice because it's just serving as a band-aid? I believe it's serving as a band-aid and it's giving us temporary relief, right? If we're utilizing meditation in that form of way. So emotional health is getting into your body, and that's when we can do the shadow work to be like, okay, if instead of meditating and anytime I have a thought, I'm just going to come back to my mantra so I can note that thought and let it just pop and disappear and float away, I'm going to say, hey, let me feel this thought or this belief or this feeling, and let me accept and surrender to it, because that's the only way I can get to the other side of it. And this is what I teach with my breath method. I have an acronym, breath, and basically that's the whole process there. It's the shadow work to accept your limiting thoughts and feelings so that we can transform them, because otherwise we just get stuck in toxic positivity. And toxic positivity is just acting like everything is fine, even though when deep down it's not, and you're not doing your work to resolve that.
Definitely felt that before. Toxic positivity. I wanted to ask you about this topic here. So when you say that you want to accept these emotions, what does acceptance look like?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question. So in the breath acronym, that's the A. A in breath is accept to surrender. And typically it's like what we did at the beginning of this exercise. Now, we only did that for 90 seconds. I have a weekly free community where I lead breath work every single Wednesday, and it's about a 20-minute session of breath work. So like what I did at the beginning was just like a little sample of something calm, right? But we did a breathwork exercise to enter rest and digest. What I usually do is activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is known as fight or flight, but that's doing it a disservice to call it fight or flight, because it's more of an alert state as opposed to the negative connotation that comes with fight or flight. So we can utilize breath work to get into that alert state for more energy, more stamina, like performance type stuff. And we can also do that to shut down the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking, analytical, and logical mind. Now, in the breathwork exercise we did earlier, we didn't do any of that to get into an alert state. We just went into straight rest and digest. How I guided us through that to do our shadow work was with my verbal cues. Hey, what's coming up? What's that negative belief? For you, it was criticism. Now, my question for you is, in that brief exercise, did you feel like you were able to get to a point of acceptance? Okay, perfect. And the reason for that is because we're in a restful state, right? If I were to work with you for 10 minutes, but especially if I had 20 minutes and I were to get you into a state called transient hypofrontality, which means we are temporarily shutting down your prefrontal cortex of your thinking analytical mind, then we can enter into your limbic brain. This is where flow states happen. The limbic brain is your emotional brain. It's the prefrontal cortex of our thinking analytical logical mind that keeps us from being able to surrender and to go deeper. And that's why a lot of times, like, I think people are doing breath work as a disservice, because they're like, hey, if you're feeling anxiety, if you're feeling stress, just do some breath work to calm it. I'm like, no, that's not how you do it. You do it by doing your shadow work, by going deeper. Now, the more you breathe with me and the more you understand this process, you will get to a point of being able to leverage a restful exercise like we did earlier and to process it quicker, because it will become familiar for your nervous system. But I think of it as like training wheels, right? For riding a bike, we're learning here, right? So as we're learning, let's get that prefrontal cortex offline, so we can get into our emotional body and really allow ourselves to surrender to that feeling so that we can transform it.
What are some ways that people can access flow states? And could you just define a flow state for anyone that has no idea what that means?
Yeah, I mean, a flow state's just like getting in the zone, right? Like basically, the movie Soul explains it so well. But anytime you feel like time doesn't exist and you're just quote unquote in the zone, most of us know that flow state from a scientific point of view, a transient hypofrontality, temporarily shutting down the prefrontal cortex of our thinking mind, which is the newest part of our brain, and entering into more of the limbic system of our emotional body. And how people can get into flow states, I love cold plunges. I think it's one of the best ways to just turn off the thinking mind and like get straight to that source type place. Breathwork obviously is an amazing tool. If there's something that really lights you up, like fitness, like, we call it runner's high or things like that, that can give you that type of flow state. And then from a supplement point of view, there's amazing supplements and nootropics out there. A lot of the holistic, or what's the word I'm looking for? The functional mushrooms. There's so many different ones, from ashwagandha to lion's mane to cordyceps, all of these. And there's some amazing new supplements, a couple of which that I'm repping. One is called More Than Energy, and it's escaping me the ingredients in it now. It's a newer company and a newer relationship, but they have some really amazing ingredients that go into their products that really help you to get into these states.
So you talked a lot about, so you said, cold plunges, breath work, fitness through runner's high, functional supplements, products, mushrooms. A lot of this stuff is very physical in its. Do you think you can get into flow state through thought?
Through thought.
Yeah, in the sense of like, can you focus on something particular in your mind that can then lead you to? I'm thinking of things like hypnosis. Like, what does hypnosis do there? And are there ways to access that?
Yeah, I mean, we could get someone into a trance. Typically, when I think of flow state, I think more of like accessing your human being to get into your human doing.
Mm.
It's interesting because I wouldn't necessarily, myself at least, categorize hypnosis as like a flow state. That's a trance state to me. And what's happening with hypnosis is, a lot of times, depending on the degree of hypnosis you're doing, but for my example of reprogramming the subconscious mind through MER, we're generally switching someone from beta brainwave states down to theta brainwave states. And when we get into theta brainwave states, that's when we can start to rewire the neural pathways in the brain to create new neural networks. And that's basically what we're doing to create a new version of ourselves, to reprogram the supercomputer of our mind.
Can you talk to me a little bit about visualization,
Mhm.
and how you use that in your own life? Because for me, for example, I have periods where I am able to visualize things very clearly and see them through, and sometimes they're just blocked, or I lose focus on the particular vision I have, and I just move to other visuals in some ways, which is why I'm asking this question.
Yeah, for me, I think of visualization as like mental rehearsal, because I do use the word visualization, but for me personally, I don't really get visuals. So it's much more of like a mental rehearsal. And what was key for me was learning that it's about feeling. I spent so much time just visualizing or doing these mental rehearsals, but I wouldn't feel it. And truly, it's a cliche to say if you're in this line of work, but feeling is the secret. And there's a spiritual teacher from the early 1900s. His name is Neville Goddard. And his work has changed my life to truly understand like how the subconscious creates our reality, and how much like we can do all of our affirmations, our visualizations, but if we don't actually feel it in our nervous system, then it's not worth a damn. And that goes straight back to mental and emotional health, right? Like the mental fortitude, the mental fitness, the mental practice, the mental rehearsal of a visualization without the felt sensation is going to do nothing for you.
How can we? I think I feel this. I don't know if you feel the same, but in general, I'm generalizing. See that feel men find it much harder to feel
Mhm.
all the entire sort of spectrum of emotions. What are your thoughts on that, and what's happening there?
Yeah, biologically, we're wired that way. Where women are more wired to feel and to be connected to their intuition. That's very much a feminine trait. I forget what it's called, but a friend was just telling me about the something. I don't know, it was two C's, but there's this thin part in the middle of the brain that's even thinner for females rather than males, which it helps them to get to those spaces more. But generally speaking, I mean, this gets into like energies and biology and things like that. But with practice, especially through breath work, we can access those places. The name of the game really is slowing down and finding ways to access stillness.
One last question I had for you here was, what's a belief that you have about the health and wellness world that most of your peers would disagree with?
Yeah, my favorite one is using breath work as a band-aid. I feel like so many people are talking about breath work of like, oh, feeling stressed, feeling anxiety, do box breathing, do this, do that. And it's like, no, what you're doing is compartmentalizing and adding more baggage that at some point in your life is going to come straight into your face that you're going to have to address later. It's that quick fix mentality of like, not thinking about the long term, which is why I'm so into shadow work and going deeper so that we can get to the root when it comes up as opposed to just creating more baggage.
Are there some questions that people, the reason I started this was because I wanted this to become a space where people that are listening or watching this get the best or the right questions to ask themselves to figure out who they are in some ways. I was wondering if there are some questions when it comes to shadow work that people can start getting into to understand things that they are not aware of.
For sure. Yeah. If you're listening to this and you identify with quote unquote doing the work, know this: you're doing your shadow work. Literally, to do the work, to lean in and to address your mental, emotional health and ask these bigger questions is shadow work. By definition, Carl Jung coined the term the shadow, which is to make the unconscious to conscious awareness. So, all shadow work is just diving into those hidden parts of yourself to shine a light on them so that you can be aware of them. When we see the thing that's like, oh, I don't want to see this, I don't want to feel this, I don't want to look at that right now, that's the time that we're not doing our shadow work. That doesn't mean that we fail, but it's just recognizing that all of this is shadow work. And at any time, if we're not ready or for whatever reason to surrender, that's fine. Just don't give up, and that's the only time you wouldn't be doing shadow work, really.
Does your shadow ever disappear?
I don't believe so.
It's an everlasting phenomena that you're trying to just get better at handling or understanding.
Yeah, and I mean the shadow's not a bad thing, right? Like a lot of people look at the shadow and they're like, "Oh, the shadow is the enemy, or the ego is the enemy," or any of those like new agey
That's a
things.
book, right?
I think so, yeah. But the point being, like with the shadow, a lot of people go, "Oh, the dark side of myself." All this, it's like, no, 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 no. Take all that whole narrative out of it. Go back to the definition. It's to make the unconscious conscious. Stop giving things a label of good or bad. It just is, and just allow it to come through. But yeah, looking at the shadow like the enemy, or looking at the shadow like it's a bad thing, you're creating more animosity, you're creating more division, you're creating more duality. That's what we want here, is to integrate it as opposed to create a divisive type nature.
Yeah. Is there anything, Sam, that we haven't surfaced that you want to talk about as we're wrapping this up?
Your questions have been awesome. This has been fun. Yeah, you covered so much ground. I mean, there's a lot to cover. I'll close it with this. You know, a lot of people, especially in their early 20s, are wanting to know that they're doing their best. They want to be on track with their bigger purpose in their life. And whether you're consider yourself a mindful or spiritual person or not, I think it will resonate with you that like there's a lot of pressure to find out and discover your purpose. Understand that quantum physics is real. Quantum entanglement, matter of fact, received a Nobel Prize just a couple of years ago. And quantum entanglement's basically like, hey, when you think of someone, then they reach out or something like that, right? Quantum physics teaches that the outer world is a reflection of our inner world. So if needing to find your purpose or putting extra pressures on yourself to like show up in a certain way for your mission, your purpose, anything like that is creating more chaos in your inner world, then consider this. Maybe your purpose isn't in the external thing. Maybe it's about slowing down, it's finding stillness, learning to radiate that inner homeostasis, and from there, creating the outer world. We don't make the changes in the outer world, we make the changes in the inner world, and those get reflected in the outer world.
Dude, that's so awesome. Any books you'd recommend? Let's say 3 books you'd recommend people to check out on this topic.
For sure. If you're brand new to this path and you're just like straight getting into mindfulness, spirituality, Untethered Soul. If you want to go deeper on the subconscious mind, MER, Mental Emotional Release by Dr. Matt James. That's who I learned from. And final one I'll do is shameless plug of my recent book, Overcome the Overwhelm. That one I teach nervous system regulation combined with subconscious mind reprogramming.
Let's go. Thank you so much, man. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.